Welcome to today's custom-tailored deep dive. We have an incredibly specific mission today, which is to do a close reading of a piece of text called The Architecture of Self-Worth.
Right.
And the source material we're working with today is, well, it's highly unusual.
Oh, really?
Because it is literally just 2 sentences long.
2 sentences, yeah, that's it.
That's the whole thing. But our goal today is to pull apart those 2 sentences, uncover the profound psychological framework hiding inside them, and figure out how they provide a blueprint for completely rewiring how we approach our relationships and, our own personal value.
It's amazing how much density is packed into such a tiny space.
It really is.
Yeah.
So to actually understand what this text is trying to do, I think it helps to think about how we usually picture physical architecture.
Okay, yeah.
When we imagine building something, whether it's, a house, a bunker, a skyscraper, we always picture concrete.
Heavy materials.
Exactly. Steel beams, heavy, rigid blueprints. You pour this thick foundation, you frame up the walls, and the entire goal is containment.
Right, keeping things in.
Yeah, you build a structure to trap the unpredictable environment outside and to keep everything you value securely locked inside. It is fundamentally an exercise in control.
And, physical buildings have to be designed that way. They're engineered to withstand massive external forces like wind and gravity.
Right.
They require structural rigidity just to survive the elements.
But we take that exact same rigid blueprint and we try to apply it to our internal lives.
We really do.
We build our psychological foundations, our romantic relationships, even our career using this language of containment. We try to lock people in. We build these massive emotional walls to keep our partners or our friends from leaving us.
Which is an exhausting way to live.
Totally exhausting.
Yeah.
And so the text we're looking at today poses this radical question. What if the absolute strongest material you could possibly use for your own internal foundation is an open door?
Wow.
Right. What if true structural integrity, like the kind that can actually survive a crisis, requires completely surrendering your grip? Okay, let's unpack this.
What's fascinating here is how these few lines entirely flip the traditional script on the fear of abandonment.
Yes, exactly.
Because for most human beings, the possibility of someone leaving triggers this deep, almost primal panic response.
Where?
We view abandonment as the ultimate vulnerability, right? Something that just has to be defended against at all costs.
Right, we put up all the armor.
Exactly. But this text takes that exact fear and engineers it into a position of absolute strength. It strips away the armor we usually wear in relationships and replaces it with a completely different kind of boundary.
And the very first boundary it establishes is what the text calls the freedom to leave.
Such a powerful phrase.
It really is. The instruction is to start with a bold, self-assured hook. And the hook is simply this: I never force anyone to choose me.
Boom. Just right out of the gate.
Right out of the gate. And when I first read that, the word force really jumped out because my immediate thought was physical coercion or giving someone a cartoonish ultimatum like, marry me or I'm burning your house down.
Right. The really dramatic stuff.
Yeah. But in the nuanced world of actual human relationships, forcing someone is rarely that theatrical.
No, it's far more insidious than ultimatums, really. Force, in the context of this architecture of self-worth, is any energy expended to artificially manufacture someone's desire to stay.
Artificially manufacture. I like that.
Right. And it takes so many forms. It looks like trying to convince a hesitant partner of your value by constantly reciting a resume of your good deeds.
Oh, man, yeah.
It looks like begging for bare minimum attention and calling it working on the relationship.
Ouch, yes.
Or it shows up when we over-accommodate someone's bad behavior, completely flattening our own boundaries, just so they won't get mad and walk away.
We just shrink ourselves.
Exactly. Even subtle emotional manipulation, like offering a heavy sigh and a guilt trip when a friend wants to spend a weekend away from you. That is a mechanism of force.
That makes a lot of sense.
So granting someone the absolute freedom to leave is the ultimate grueling test of your own internal foundation because it demands that you stop doing all of those things.
And those subtle forms of force are just so ingrained in how we socialize. It brings to mind a very specific, universally uncomfortable dynamic.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
Picture being at a party, right? And you're talking to someone who clearly wants to exit the conversation.
We have all been there.
Right, you can see the micro-expressions. Their eyes are darting toward the snack table.
The shoulders have shifted.
Yes. Their feet are pointed toward the hallway. And instead of just graciously saying, hey, I'll let you mingle, and letting them walk away, you feel this spike of insecurity.
Because you're not being actively chosen.
Exactly. So what do? You subtly shift your body weight to physically block the door.
Right. Just a little step to the side.
Yep. You start talking a little faster, you get a little louder, you start dropping desperate little conversational hooks, trying to manufacture their interests.
Hoping some of it lands.
Right. And the entire interaction suddenly turns into this conversational hostage situation, born entirely out of the panic of not being chosen in that moment. You are, in effect, forcing them to stay.
And the text is essentially demanding that you step away from the door.
Which is so hard.
It's incredibly hard. It requires a profound level of psychological discipline. Because stepping away from the door means you have to sit with the immediate visceral anxiety that they might actually walk through it.
And we have to look at the why behind that panic, don't we?
Definitely. From an evolutionary psychology standpoint, being abandoned by your tribe meant literal death.
Literal death, yeah.
So our nervous systems are wired to interpret someone pulling away as an existential threat. When we sense someone's attention drifting, our attachment system flares up.
Red alert.
Exactly. And we instinctively reach out to grab them, to force them back into our orbit, because our brain is telling us that isolation is dangerous.
Honestly, knowing that evolutionary background makes the text's instruction feel almost impossible.
It does feel like fighting your own biology.
It really does. I hear, never force anyone to choose me. And while it sounds incredibly stoic on paper, my stomach drops a little at the reality of it.
Yeah.
Like, if we apply this to a 10-year marriage or a lifelong friendship and we are completely hands-off, like, if we just stand there and hold the door wide open for people to leave whenever they experience a moment of doubt, doesn't that become terrifyingly passive?
That's the fear, isn't it?
Yeah. It borders on sounding apathetic, like saying, whatever happens, happens. If I'm on the other side of that and my partner's just shrugging at the door, I'm going to feel like they aren't invested in the relationship at all.
Right, and the instinct to interpret that as passivity is incredibly common. But it completely misunderstands the underlying mechanism of the philosophy.
How so?
Well, passivity implies apathy or lack of agency. What the text is describing is the active daily embodiment of high self-value.
Okay.
To see why this isn't passive, we really only have to look at the very next phrase in the source material. It delivers this blunt, almost ruthless assertion.
Oh, I remember this line.
It says, if someone thinks they can find better elsewhere, they should go.
It doesn't flinch at all.
It doesn't. And the operative word in that sentence is things.
Right.
Notice the phrasing. It does not say, if someone can objectively find a mathematically superior, wealthier, more attractive partner, they should go. It says, if someone thinks they can find better.
Wow. Yeah.
The reality of what actually exists out there in the dating pool or the job market is completely irrelevant to this architecture.
Because the damage isn't being done by the external world. The damage is being done by the perception of the person standing right in front of you.
Exactly. The mere fact that the other person believes they could do better is the structural damage. If they're looking out the window, imagining some greener pasture, the foundation of the connection is already deeply compromised.
That makes total sense.
According to this text, high self-value means refusing to negotiate your worth or enter a debate with someone who is already eyeing the exit. You do not pull out a PowerPoint presentation to prove why you are the best option. The moment they start weighing you against an imaginary alternative, the only high-value response is to point them toward the door.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. I grasp the logic of refusing to debate your worth. I really do.
Sure.
But here is the tension I'm feeling. Where is the line between having this unshakable high self-value and just being cold, aloof, and completely dismissive of normal human hesitation?
That's a great question.
Because, people get scared in relationships. People get grass is greener syndrome. It's a natural human flaw.
Happens all the time.
Right. So if your immediate response to a partner's doubt is, there's the door, have a nice life, doesn't that cross the line into deep arrogance?
That tension right there is the crux of the entire philosophy. And the difference between arrogance and self-assurance really comes down to a psychological concept called the locus of control.
The locus of control. Okay, break that down for me.
Your locus of control is where you believe the power in your life resides. Arrogance is driven by an external locus of control.
Meaning the power is out there.
Yes. An arrogant person fundamentally needs external validation to feel safe. So when their partner doubts them, the arrogant person pucks out their chests and says, "You can't find better than me. I'm the best you'll ever have. You'd be a fool to leave."
Oh, I've heard that speech before.
We all have.
Yeah.
But notice what they're doing. They're still desperately trying to manipulate the other person's perception. They're still blocking the door. They are just using intimidation instead of pleading.
So they are actively participating in the debate.
Exactly.
They are standing at the podium, arguing their case to the jury, which proves they still believe the jury holds the power.
Bingo. Self-assurance, however, is driven by an internal locus of control. A truly self-assured person has internalized their value. They don't need the other person's agreement to make it real.
That is a massive shift.
Huge shift. So when faced with doubt, the self-assured person says, "I know exactly what I bring to the table. If you don't see it, or if you genuinely believe there was a better match for you out there, I respect your journey enough to let you go find it.
Wow.
And I respect myself enough not to sit in the waiting room while you shop around."
Not sitting in the waiting room, that's powerful.
It isn't coldness, and it isn't punishing the other person. It is a radical form of mutual respect. You are respecting their autonomy to search, and you are rigorously defending your own boundary of not being an option on a menu.
It's the difference between frantic, grasping energy and grounded, resting energy.
Yes, resting energy.
And if you think about a time in your own life where you compromised your internal architecture, that frantic energy is so recognizable.
Oh, completely.
Like, think about a moment when you could feel someone pulling away. Maybe it was a romantic partner whose texts were getting shorter.
Or taking hours to reply.
Exactly. Or maybe a boss who was constantly overlooking you for promotions while praising everyone else. Or a friend who only ever called when they needed a favor.
We all have at least one of those.
Right. Remember the sheer bone-deep exhaustion of trying to prove your worth to someone who was already half out the door. You contort yourself.
You really do.
You try to be perfectly accommodating, endlessly useful, hoping that if you just provide enough tangible value, they will finally look at you and decide to stay.
And that exhaustion you're describing is the inevitable result of operating with an external locus of control.
Because you're working so hard for something you can't guarantee.
Exactly. You are burning massive amounts of psychological fuel trying to control a variable that is fundamentally uncontrollable, the internal desires of another human being.
Which transitions perfectly into the final and arguably most challenging distinction in our source text. The fundamental difference between being actively desired and being settled for.
Yes. The text wraps up this framework with one profound conclusion. You only want to be a choice, never a default option.
A default option. That word default is doing heavy lifting here.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
If we look at technology, a default setting is simply what happens automatically when no active decision is made by the user.
It's just the pre-programmed path.
Right. It is the path of absolute least resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And in human relationships, slipping into the role of the default option is incredibly dangerous because it often masquerades as stability.
Right. From the outside, a default relationship just looks like a long-term commitment. Two people living in the same house, eating dinner together every night.
But the internal engine of desire is completely dead.
Dead, yeah.
A default relationship persists because breaking up requires a tremendously uncomfortable conversation, or moving out requires breaking a lease and dividing finances.
Logistical nightmares.
Or the sheer prospect of starting over on dating apps seems calorically exhausting. So the other person is staying, not because they are waking up every single day actively thrilled to be sharing a life with you.
Right.
They are staying because leaving requires too much friction.
It reminds me of the difference between the factory setting ringtone on a new phone and going out of your way to set a custom song.
Oh man, that is the perfect analogy.
Right. When you buy a brand new phone, it comes with that generic marimba default ringtone out of the box.
Do.
Exactly. And millions of people walk around with that exact same ringtone. And why do they have it? It's not because they heard those little digital chimes and thought, this is a musical masterpiece. This perfectly represents my soul.
Definitely not.
They have it because they literally never bothered to open the settings menu.
They just accepted what was there.
It is pure psychological inertia. Nobody actively, passionately chooses the default ringtone. They merely tolerate it because changing it takes 3 minutes of effort.
Yep.
But when we accept being a default option in our relationships, we really have to look at the why behind our own inertia. Why do we tolerate being someone's marimba ringtone?
Yeah, it's a brutal question to ask yourself.
It is, but it usually comes down to the sunk cost fallacy. We've invested 3 years or 5 years into this person. Or we have this deep-seated lack of self-worth that whispers, if I demand more, I'll end up with nothing.
So true.
So we accept the quiet resentment of being a default because the alternative, the empty space of being alone, feels just too terrifying to face.
And the tragedy of accepting that default status is that you become decorative rather than structural.
Decorative rather than structural. Say more about that.
Well, if we go back to our architecture metaphor from the beginning of the dive, a default option is just decorative trim. It's a fixture someone got used to looking at. But if styles change or if they summon the energy for a remodel, it's very easy to rip out and replace.
Wow. Ouch.
Right. But being a choice, as the text demands, means being a load-bearing wall.
Okay, yes.
A choice requires intent, effort, and specific daily desire. When you demand to be a choice, you are demanding that someone wakes up and consciously reinforces the foundation with you.
That is a completely different dynamic.
Completely. When you are the default, the other person might be physically sitting on the couch next to you, but their psychological bags are packed and sitting by the front door.
So what does this all mean when we bring it down to the ground level?
That's audit time.
Yes, exactly. When we take these two sentences and apply them to the messy, complicated reality of everyday life, it demands a pretty severe audit. It requires us to hold a mirror up to our relationships and ask questions we usually try to avoid.
Hard questions.
Like, am I actively being chosen by this person, or am I just the path of least resistance? Am I the candidate this company actually values, or was I just the one willing to accept the lowest salary without negotiating?
That's a big one.
Yeah. Am I the friend they call because they genuinely crave my perspective, or just because I'm the only one who always says yes to Friday night plans?
And that audit is deeply uncomfortable.
Very.
Because if you do it honestly, and you realize you are currently accepting default status in some area of your life, the architecture of self-worth dictates a very clear, uncompromising response. You have to invoke the freedom to leave. You have to be willing to tear down the decorative trim and walk away from the false comfort of being a placeholder.
And to have the strength to actually execute that, to walk away from a relationship or a job or a friendship where you are merely tolerated, you have to build the exact internal architecture we've been decoding today.
You really do.
You have to construct an internal foundation so solid, so deeply rooted in your own self-worth, that you are no longer terrified of the empty space that follows your departure.
Because that empty space is not a void to be feared. The empty space is the necessary clearing required to allow someone else to step in and actively choose you in the future.
We have covered some incredibly dense psychological terrain today, unpacking everything from evolutionary attachment fears to the locus of control, all pulled from just a few lines of text.
Quite the journey.
It really has. To synthesize what we've discovered, the architecture of self-worth is built on 3 unshakable pillars. The first pillar is granting the absolute freedom to leave. It means stepping away from the door, dropping the resume of good deeds, and refusing to use manipulation or desperation to force someone to stay in your orbit.
And the second pillar is resting safely in high self-value.
Yes.
It is the understanding that if someone's perception shifts and they believe they can find better elsewhere, your response is never to debate them. You refuse to participate in an auction for your own dignity.
You refuse to participate in an auction for your own dignity. That is going to stay with me for a long time.
It's a great line.
And the final pillar is demanding to be an active choice. Fiercely refusing to ever settle for being someone's default option simply because leaving requires too much friction.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the entire framework is a masterclass in shifting your locus of control from the external world to the internal.
Truly.
True self-worth cannot be outsourced to a partner's mood, a boss's approval, or a friend's convenience. It cannot be built on the shaky ground of someone else's hesitation. When your foundation is truly internal, you stop relying on other people to serve as your load-bearing walls. You become structurally sound all on your own, which ironically is exactly what makes you capable of building healthy, enduring connections with others.
Wow. As we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We've spent this entire time looking outward, applying this text to how we relate to other people, to romantic partners and bosses.
Right.
The text warns us against being the default option for others. But there is a terrifying, beautiful question waiting for us when we flip the mirror entirely inward.
Oh, that's good.
Look closely at your own life, your career trajectory, your daily habits, the city you live in. Are there areas where you are treating yourself as the default option?
Yeah.
Have you settled into a life path simply because it was the path of least resistance? Are you living a default life because actively choosing the life you actually want requires too much friction?
That's a question that will keep you up at night.
It will. Take a hard look at the walls around you and make sure you aren't trapping yourself in a foundation you didn't even design.
Well said.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. We hope it gave you some tools to inspect your own architecture. Until next time, keep questioning the blueprint.